Hello, beautiful ones, and welcome to another episode of Taking Time to Heal. So, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Holly. I am a holistic health coach, a Reiki master, a meditation teacher, probably many more things to add to that list, but I think that would do for now. So, today I wanted to give you guys a bit of a seasonal update. So for those of you that don't know, one of my specialisms is Ayurveda, and Ayurveda has been instrumental, I would say, in helping me manage my 3 autoimmune conditions as well as my general well-being. And one of the things that really resonated with me quite early on was this connection between the season and the self-care we should be undertaking, because it just made sense to me, right? And I think if we all take a moment to stop and think, of course we need different things at different times of the year. You know, we feel it in our body, right? We crave different things during those cold winter months compared to those hot summer days. There are things that our skin tends to do at different times of the year. We might find our hair or our digestion does different things at different times of the year. And so the more we can work with this, the more we are able to stay in a state of balance. Now, this isn't some kind of, magical thing that happens, as magical as it feels. But the truth is, we are nature, right? We were not that long ago in the kind of scheme of time, we were hunter-gatherers living off the land, living with the seasons. So of course those things have an instrumental impact on us in terms of our physical body, in terms of our emotional well-being, in terms of the things that we might find ourselves interested in at different times of the year. So I may go into that in a more detail in another episode, but for now that's just kind of a bit of an introduction, and hopefully as we go through this today, that will make a lot more sense. It will perhaps resonate on another level for you. So at the moment, we have just come to the end of August, and at this time, this is the time when we feel those elemental energies shifting. What I mean by that is, we see this in the weather, right? In the summer, we have more of that fire energy, more of that heat coming from the sun. We might also experience more of that water element. So that could be those summer showers and those summer thunderstorms that we need that, break up that heat a little bit and give that earth everything it needs. But as we start shifting out of that summer energy, out of that fire energy, as the sun starts to move away, and I'm talking to the people here in the northern hemisphere as opposed to the southern hemisphere, but we will get to you at some point, I promise. But for those of us in the northern hemisphere, we're shifting from that kind of fiery with a touch of water element into the elements of air and ether. Now, that rise in air and ether we see in the weather, right? It gets windy. So, autumn is that time when the leaves are blown away from the trees. We're letting stuff go. Well, nature certainly is. It's letting go, ready to shift into a state of somewhat dormancy, ready for the next year. And these elements of air and ether have a beautiful effect on us in terms of our mental and emotional well-being, as well as our physical body. And I wanted to talk into a few things that you might be experiencing or might experience going into this Vata season. But also, I wanted to give you some tips on how to keep that sense of balance during this shift. Because what we know, Ayurvedically speaking, is it's often in these transitions that we go out of balance, that we become unwell, that we get the viruses, that our body all of a sudden doesn't feel the same and starts acting up, playing up. But I also want to touch on the point that these transitions can also be beautiful and helpful if we can work with them. So the intention is to work in harmony with nature and not fight against it, because ultimately we are nature, right? We're just complex animals living on this planet. And I'm not sure anyone would argue with that, but I'm sure there might be some. So if you have an argument, put it below. I'd be pleased to hear it. So these elements of air and ether can be particularly helpful for those of us that love to play in the air and ether. So we often find that those kind of pursuits that are a bit more creative, a bit more spiritual, feel more powerful at this time of year. Perhaps we have more ideas, we have we feel more interest in certain things. And I can give you a really good example of this. You know, I've already started thinking about all of these crafts and things that I love to do that I've kind of parked for the season, or had consciously or unconsciously let go of during the summertime. And it's not unusual, actually, for those of you that have a spiritual practice, a sadhana, it depends which lineage you come from, but a kind of spiritual practice that grounds you in your day-to-day life. It's not unusual for us to find that kind of, we lose our grip around that during that summertime. But during this autumn time, we can find that that interest is sparked again. And we feel called to perhaps get out the oracle cards, or we feel called to do some of those more deeper practices. So for example, in the membership this month, we're doing some work around our ancestral lineage and connecting with our ancestral past. Now that may not be a beautiful experience for everyone. So I want to just kind of acknowledge that, because I had that conversation with the membership yesterday that, you know, we don't always have a great relationship with our ancestral history. And if that is the case, then we can still work with our spiritual lineage. So the people we feel connected to from that soul perspective, that could be a whole podcast in itself. So I'm going to stop there on that train of thought. But it's not unusual this autumn time we start feeling a bit more connected to our spiritual practice, more connected to our creative pursuits. And like I say, even last night I was thinking, I started watching The Sewing Bee. Does anyone else love The Sewing Bee? I would love to know. And actually, I have no skill or talent whatsoever when it comes to sewing. And I think the last time I sewed anything was when I was a teen, and I don't remember it being very good. But it comes to this autumn period, and I love to start watching those kind of crafty programs, things like the sewing bee, the bake off, and as the season develops, things like the crafty Christmas programs where you're encouraged to spend an enormous amount of money buying a load of equipment to make something you could probably pick up in a shop for a quarter of the price. But it's not the point, right? It's the activity of crafting, of being creative, of making something. And often we find that we feel more drawn to that at this time of year. Not only because, the weather might be turning, but those elements of air and ether really connect us into that creative energy. But in terms of things that we probably need to look out for as we're going into this transition, is often we can find that these elements can begin to build up in the body. So as we get to the end of this summer period, I'm not saying summer's over, but as that summer period starts to cool down, if we're not careful, we can find that we've accumulated that fire from the summer. And that fire can manifest in terms of really physical things. So inflammation in the body, those kind of fiery conditions, so things that feel heated, angry, aggravated. So things like excess acid. We can find we have problems with those fiery organs. I was talking to a client yesterday that was struggling with her liver. This is the time when that fire element has built up inside us. Now that can also manifest in our mental and emotional well-being. So we can find that we're more impatient. We've got less tolerance. We feel, and I just had a thought then, like you really see this in the news at the moment, right? There seems to be a lot of division going on. And it makes me really sad to see, because it reminds me of, do you remember during COVID when we were watching a lot of that division? A lot of it was happening in America. Don't get me wrong, we experienced quite a lot of it too in the UK, but not to that extreme. But recently it feels like that extreme division is raising its head in the UK, and I'm hoping as the season changes we see a cooling and a calming of that, but who knows. But other ways this can show up for us can be, like say, physical things like rashes, heat rash, aggravation of the skin, aggravation of the belly, aggravation of the digestive system, and mentally and emotionally impatient, angry, frustrated. Even things like envious can come up for us during this kind of prolonged heat that we've certainly experienced in the UK this year. But the truth is, there's something we can do about it, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So during this autumn time, and also during the springtime, but we'll talk about that on another episode, we often, Ayurvedically speaking, undertake a bit of a cleanse. Now, when I say cleanse here, I'm not talking about a crash diet. I'm not talking about like a juice fast. I'm not talking about intermittent fasting. I'm not talking about any of that. What I'm talking about is giving our bodies and our minds and our emotions an opportunity to just let some of that go, right? So we do that through the food that we're eating. We do that through supplements we might take, but we also do that mentally and emotionally. This time of year, this transition of the season is a really beautiful opportunity to stop and take stock. And I don't mean like in a 5-minute journaling practice, but to really contemplate, okay, where am I? what's going on for me? What's going on in my life? What do I actually need during this time? What is some of that emotional baggage that I can put down because it's become too heavy, it's become too consuming, and actually I can see it's holding me back from the future that I desire to create. So some of the signs I would say that a cleanse would be beneficial for you are some of those things that I just talked about. But there's also other ways this shows up for us. So we might find that we have a particular condition that has become aggravated. Digestive issues particularly benefit from this cleanse process. So, I worked with a lady at one point who had been suffering with IBS for about 20 years. And in the space of a few weeks working together, of going through this cleanse process, she actually managed to put IBS into remission. It can be that effective. And I just want to emphasize that, because I think sometimes when we're talking about holistic health processes, or especially ones that are so rooted in history, so Ayurveda is at least 2,000 years old. We think it could be a lot longer than that, but originally it was an oral tradition that was passed down through the rishis and the sages, and also the yogis. So if you haven't heard of Ayurveda before, it is that sister science to yoga. In some ways it's explained as like the mother science to yoga, because it's this kind of overarching principles that actually guide us in our yoga practice. So with our yoga practice, we can help move some of this energy. We can use particular thought patterns and energies into our practice so that we can shift and change some of the things that we might be experiencing internally, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, by understanding this framework of the elements. What I will say actually on that point is I actually have a free training course coming up, and it's going to be live, and it's called Healing with the Elements, and we're going to be working with the knowledge of lineages such as Ayurveda, but as well as things like folk medicine and shamanism, so that we can understand how we can use the elements as this beautiful framework to understand what's going on for us, but also to understand what we need in a really intuitive way. So you don't need this complex textbook, you don't need this big list of herbs, but you can tap into the energy behind things so that you can intuitively feel into what it is that you need during that time. So if that sounds of interest to you, make sure to visit my website where you can sign up. It's completely free. And if you cannot attend live, that's not a problem either, because the replays are available, as well as lots of beautiful supporting resources I've created to really give you everything you need on this journey so that you can take it away and start putting it into action. So that was kind of a side note, but it seemed appropriate while we were talking about the elements. But I feel like I'm jumping around a lot today, so apologies, lovelies. It's probably the shift in the seasons, right? I'm getting that air and ether and all the ideas are flowing, but perhaps not in a linear fashion. But back to cleansing. So IBS, Crohn's, diverticulitis, those kind of digestive issues, things like excess acid, air in the belly, colicky pains, constipation, irregular bowel movements, all of these can be often very quickly rectified with a supportive cleanse process. Now, other things that we can find get cleared up quite quickly with a cleanse process are skin issues. Our skin and our gut are generally the first places we see an imbalance. And sometimes it's not like an obvious thing, but we know, right? We can look at someone and you can tell if they're healthy or if they are filled with vitality because it shows in their skin. They are glowing. They have, you can see the energy radiating from them. But sometimes those skin problems can be a little bit more obvious. You know, perhaps it's not a grayness, perhaps it's not a dullness that you're experiencing, but perhaps it's a heatedness, rashes, things like eczema or psoriasis. These are often very linked to what's going on in our gut. And a cleanse process is an opportunity for that. I'm kind of dipping it in between Ayurveda and, more Western allopathic medicine here. But what we know is that the gut is closely linked to the skin. So we have that good bacteria in our gut. And sometimes that bacteria becomes out of balance. And when that bacteria is out of balance, this shows up in all areas of the body. So initially the skin, the hair, the eyes, we can often start seeing the imbalance there quite quickly. But there's also these layers after that we don't see. So Ayurvedically speaking, before we get to disease or condition, there's like 7 layers that our body goes through of imbalance before we even recognize it in the West. Now, when we know these signs, when we can see this happening and we've got the tools to reverse that, to do something about it, then we can catch conditions before they even develop. But even beyond that, when we have a condition, we're able to manage it a lot easier because we can see those little whispers our body is giving us before it gets too bad. Now, other ways that our body might be signaling that a cleanse might be really useful is often in the brain, right? So cognitively, when we're carrying a lot of toxins, when we are in need of resetting that gut health, we can find that we experience things like brain fog. We also might have things like unexplained anxiety. We might also find that our mood is particularly low or dropping and our motivation is gone. Like everything needs a bit more effort on your part. So those are some of the most obvious ways that we notice that we are in need of a cleanse. But generally speaking, most people would benefit from a cleanse during this beginning of autumn period or this harvest season period. I had to stop myself from going into that then, because that could have been a whole new podcast as well. But I wanted to bring this to your attention for a number of different reasons. One, because I think we can have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to cleansing. Many of us grew up in times when the idea of diets and those we saw a lot of fads, right? I don't know about you guys, but I saw a lot of fads growing up. And I also saw a lot of really unhealthy messaging around things like weight. And, I grew up in the 90s where very thin women were being criticized for their weight, as in like they were being perceived as carrying too much weight. And we're talking about women that were probably a size 8 or a size 10. And so many of us, let me know if this resonates, but many of us grew up seeing that and thinking that isn't right, and then finding that we just wrote off anything that involved working with our diet or nutrition as this kind of form of women's rebellion, right? We weren't going to be told what to do. And we could also see the unhealthiness and the messaging that was being given. So I just wanted to reassure you that an Ayurvedic cleanse process isn't this kind of depriving of food. It's not depriving of nutrients. This isn't a fad that will screw up your metabolism. In fact, it is likely to reignite what we call Agni, or metabolism, or resetting that good bacteria in the gut. So actually we're more able to manage our weight effectively in a really healthy way. And the truth is, I love my food. So there is no way I would be giving up food for any period of time. But with an Ayurvedic cleanse process, we go through this really structured, slow, steady process of eliminating some toxins from our diet for a while, eliminating some of those kind of heavier foods so that it gives our body a chance to reset, before really slowly reintroducing these things back into our diet. So it's literally like setting the reset button, like a reset button on a tech device. Pressing that reset button so that we can re-find ourselves again. And that sounds like quite an extreme thing to say, but I have to admit that whenever I go through a cleanse process, I am always amazed by how different I feel afterwards. Silly things that make such a difference. Things like I find my sleep improves. I find my cognitive performance, my ability to be able to find words and form sentences improves. Apologies, lovely. I'm pre-cleanse at the moment, so you may be finding I'm a little bit waffly at the moment. Hopefully you will see a difference after September. But also I just feel more myself. I just feel a bit more with it. I feel a bit more grounded. I feel a bit more in touch with my energy, so that I'm not scraping the barrel, right? And it's not just Ayurveda that talks about this, right? Most spiritual practices and lineages have some kind of form of cleansing at some point during the year. And we know that our physical body and our ability to reach particular spiritual states or states of consciousness is actually very interlinked with what's going on physically. And that's why certain paths have, guidance around this. Things like the yogis talked about the energy of different foods and how we could use that and utilize that to improve our spiritual connection. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of Ayurvedic cleansing and why it's so beautiful and useful at this time of year. And if it is something you're interested in learning more about and being supported through, then in the membership this coming month we are actually undertaking a cleanse together. We begin our preparation on the 1st of September, so you've only actually got a couple of days if you want to join us. But if you do want to join us, you can join the membership for a 14-day free trial. So during that time you can see if it's for you, and if it's not for you, that's okay. There's no pressure to stay. There's no pressure from us to keep you in a space you don't want to be in. So if after that 14-day period you feel like, do you know what, this isn't for me, you can cancel at any time. And in that membership, you can cancel at any time anyway. It's a monthly membership. So if you change your mind after a while, cancel, no questions asked. But I did want to invite you to join us, because this really is something that helps me manage my autoimmune conditions. It has a massive impact on how often I have flare-ups. You know, I was telling the membership yesterday that I notice the years where I miss a cleanse, or my cleanse is a little bit half-hearted, it has an impact on how often I flare up during that next season. So if that sounds good to you, I invite you to join us inside the Medicine Woman Collective membership. You can find information on my website under hollyboulet.com. That is spelled Holly with a Y, so Holly. Boulet is Boulle. It's French. I'm not pretentious, I promise. My husband's French. Every time I say that, I feel like I'm being Mrs. Bouquet. Does anyone remember that from Keeping Up Appearances? But I've gone down a side note again. So lovelies, that's a little bit of a seasonal update for you. I hope you enjoy this Vata season. I hope it gives you that creativity and spiritual connection perhaps you're looking forward to. And I hope you take the time to go through a cleanse process. What I would say though around that is, if you haven't done a cleanse process before, especially an Ayurvedic cleanse, then I really would encourage you to do that initially with someone that has, or with someone that is a professional around that, because you know, with anything when it comes to our diet, even when we're talking about herbal supplements, you really do need someone that can guide you through that safely, because we don't want it to be done in a way that is going to screw up your metabolism, that is going to lead to further issues down the line. So please be careful if you are undertaking a cleanse on your own and you don't have a great deal of experience with any of that. I really wouldn't recommend it. So but like I say, if you are interested in undertaking a cleanse, you can join us for 14 days for free inside the Medicine Woman Collective. All right, lovelies, I'm going to love and leave you. I've got lots of episodes planned for this next season that will help you stay balanced, help you take the time to heal that which you might be carrying around, and allow you to feel like your most favorite version of you. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.